friends, in the series which we are doing on the history of India from 1700 to 1950, today we will talk about British expansion and consolidation in Punjab. In the earlier lecture which we talked about the expansion, we talked about Mysore and Punjab and how we see that how British over a period of time they were able to expand their possessions in these regions, beginning from Bengal, where they established their rule with the Battle of Plassey and Buxar, and we see that thereafter how British they were in a way able to secure their possessions in these regions, and we find that they also saw opportunities in the regions, that how they came into conflict with the Marathas and Anglo-Maratha wars they were being fought, and then we find that they fought 4 wars with Mysore as well, and finally they were successful as well in terms of annihilating the kingdom of Mysore. And we also see that British they wanted to expand their designs or their rule in Punjab as well, and the British officials at different point of time they expressed their ideas as well, that how they will be able to secure those regions, and Punjab being a very fertile plain, and with this we find that the British officials they had this kind of a notion that when they will be able to secure Punjab, then they will be able to expand their base in India. And some of the officials they expressed this kind of a desire. Lord Ellenborough, he regarded the annexation of Punjab question of time, and wrote to the Queen on the need of reducing the Sikh power to ineffectiveness. And we find that to the Duke of Wellington, Ellenborough wrote in October 1843, the time cannot be far distant when Punjab will fall into our management. I do not look to this state of things as likely to occur next year, but as being ultimately inevitable. So, we find that British officials they were writing to each other in this vein, where they were talking about that how Punjab was to be annexed by them, and when they will be able to secure these regions, then they will be able to establish their rule in these regions as well. And we find that Lord Ellenborough he also wrote another letter to the Duke in February 1844, where he says that I earnestly hope that we may not be obligated to cross Satluj in December next. We shall not be ready so soon. I am quietly doing what I can to strengthen and equip army. So, we find that British they were also in a way readying themselves for an offensive, and for that they were accumulating man and material, and they were equipping their army as well. And these kinds of utterances, such kind of correspondences between these officials also reflected the British designs, where they were ready to secure these kinds of possessions for themselves. And we find that they were in a way increasing their army strength, their ammunitions, and Lord Hardinge, during the times of Lord Hardinge, we find that the strength of the company's army in Punjab was increased to 32,000 with 68 guns and an additional reserve force of 10,000 men at Meerut, and they also increased their naval resources as well. And we find that the commander he was giving training to his soldiers in bridge throwing as well. So, such kind of preparations they were underway during this time, so that they are able to secure these regions for themselves. And when one talks about or thinks about the preparations which were made by the East India Company, then we find that they argue that these were being done on the defensive side, and the nature of the preparations were defensive in nature, and how they were to be calculated to meet the possible eventualities of an attack from the Sikhs. And we find that it was totally hypocritical, considering the chaotic state of affairs in Punjab at that point of time, and we realize that the British they wanted to go on an offensive, and that is how they were preparing their army at that point of time by giving all sorts of training to the soldiers as well. And we find that this kind of approach by the British, it was not only evident in the case of Punjab, but it was evident elsewhere as well, because they had used these kinds of tactics in other places earlier as well. When you take the case of either Bengal or Mysore or Marathas, everywhere British we find they had used such kind of tactics where they wanted to secure these possessions for themselves, and they engaged in all sorts of deceits and treachery to in a way fill their coffers. And not only the coffers of the East India Company, we also find that some of the individuals including governor generals, they took a lot of bribery from the Indian princely states and other states, so that their coffers they also became full. And even Clive and Warren Hastings, they were being tried in the British Parliament as well. And even the British Parliament was not without any kind of stain, because as we have seen that how East India Company was giving a lot of money to the British Parliament as well. So the entire kind of a system which was created by the British in terms of saying something and doing something else was based on the idea of hypocrisy. And we find that British they used such kind of tactics to in a way strengthen or expand their rule in India. And we find that during this time the appointment of Major Broadfoot as East India Company's agent at Ludhiana for dealing with the affairs of the Sikhs and worsened the Anglo-Sikh relations. And an energetic and hot-headed man, Major Broadfoot, made impolite declaration that after Dilip Singh's death all Cis-Satluj possessions of Lahore Darbar would be liable to escheat. So we find that how British, they did not have these kinds of designs which were full of deceit, but at the same time they were also behaving very haughtily. They were so proud of themselves, and they believed in the racial policy where they could not stand the Indians, and they were very aggressive and towards the Indians, and such kind of a racial policy could be seen. And we find that when you talk about the scholars, those who have tried to talk about this kind of situation, P. Roberts, he has argued that he lays undue stress on the explosive situation at Lahore and tries to shift responsibility for war on the shoulders of the ruling clique and unmanageable Khalsa army. So we find that even the British scholars, they have in a way tried to blame the Khalsa army for this kind of a situation rather than the British designs. And when you talk about the events or the kinds of happenings which were happening at that point of time, P. Roberts has argued that Rani Jindal dreaded absolute and capricious power of the Khalsa army and found her only hope of security in urging it on to challenge the British supremacy. Either it would spend its superabundant energy in a career of conquest and sovereignty of Hindustan would pass to Sikhs, or it would be shattered in the conflict and she would then her make own peace with the offended British nation. So this main failure of Sikh war must constantly be borne in mind. So this has been in a way argued by P. Roberts. We can quote and unquote him in this way, that how he has talked about Rani Jindal's ideas, and he has also communicated that she had these kinds of designs in her mind. And we find that when one is trying to see the British situation, the kind of movements which were made by the British, the kind of preparations which the English they were making, then we find that it seemed to denote to Sikh army a campaign not of defense but of aggression, and it decided that if English wanted war, they would have it on their own territory. So we find that British, for that matter, they were giving this kind of an offensive to the Sikh army, and thereafter we see consequently Sikh troops they crossed Satluj between Hariki and Kasur on 11 December 1845 and took offensive against the English troops commanded by Sir Hugh Gough. And we find that on 13 December 1845, Henry Harding, who was the Governor General, made his declaration of war, proclaiming that the possession of Maharaja Dalip Singh on left of British bank of Satluj was confiscated and annexed to British territories. So, we find that how British, they were acting in this kind of a manner, and how the possessions of Maharaja Dalip Singh they were being taken away by the British, and how these territories which rightfully belonged to Dalip Singh were illegitimately taken by the British. And when we see that these kinds of wars which were being fought during this time, the final battle of Sobran, which was fought on 10 February 1846, and how it proved the most decisive kind of a war. And here also we find that how British, they were able to secure the help of the treacherers like Lal Singh and Teja Singh, who gave all information regarding the trenches to the British, and the battle resulted in the great slaughter of the Sikh troops as well. And how English army crossed Satluj, occupied Lahore and dictated peace terms in capital of Ranjit Singh on 9th March 1846. So, in this battle of Sobran, we find that how the treachery of these two officials, Indian officials, they in a way gave way to the British victory, and how British, they were able to dictate peace to the rulers at this point of time. And when you talk about the terms of the treaty, we find that Maharaja, he renounced for himself, his heirs and successors, all claims to or connection with territories lying to south of river Satluj. So, we find that the renouncement of Maharaja to these territories was being done, so that British are able to secure these territories for themselves. And Maharaja, who was a minor in that sense, he ceded to East India Company in perpetual sovereignty all his forts, territories and rights in Doab, or country, hill and plain situated between river Bias and Satluj. And so, we find that a lot of territory in terms of forts and rights, etc., in Doab, etc., they were being taken away by the British for themselves, and they also demanded a war indemnity of 1.5 crores from the Maharaja. And this kind of an amount, which was astronomical for Punjab at that point of time, and they did not have that kind of a money to pay the British. And we find that the Maharaja, or the Lahore Darbar, they had to in a way agree to transfer to the East India Company in perpetual sovereignty as equivalent for 1 crore of rupees all his forts, territories, rights and interests in hill countries which are situated between river Bias and Indus, including provinces of Kashmir and Hazara. So, how they did not have any kind of a lenient attitude towards Punjab, and how they were able to secure money from Maharaja on various pretexts. And the remaining 50 lakh of rupees Lahore Darbar agreed to pay on or before the ratification of treaty. So, they were not ready in any way to give any kind of concessions, and they were hell bent on securing more and more territories for themselves. And they in a way also forced Maharaja to agree to disband the mutinous troops of the Lahore army, taking from them their arms and limiting regular army to 25 battalions of infantry and 12,000 cavalry. So, in a way the army and cavalry in that sense was also reduced, so that they can have more check on Maharaja, and at the same time they can also use this kind of a money to raise their own army, so that Maharaja is not a challenge to them in future as well. So, it was an attempt to weaken the Sikh army to the British advantage. And then we also see that how Maharaja agreed never to take or retain in his service any British subject, nor subject of any European or American state, without consent of the British government. So, in that sense they did not want that the services of such kind of officials who were British or European, especially French, etc., or Americans for that matter, they could not be given to Maharaja without the consent of the British government. And we also see that the free passes they were to be allowed to the British troops through the Lahore territories. And we see that how during this particular period, Dalip Singh, who was a minor, he was recognized as Maharaja, with Rani Jindan as the regent of the state and Lal Singh as the Wazir. And we see when Sir Henry Lawrence, he was named as the British resident at Lahore, East India Company in a way suggested that it would not interfere in the internal administration of the Lahore state. And we see that Punjab was not annexed in February 1846, but we find that it was annexed later. And this kind of a contention, when you tend to see that how Governor General, he took steps to weaken the Lahore state to such an extent that its absorption was a matter of time. So, when we tend to understand that how British, they were trying to interfere in the affairs in such a manner, and the kind of treaty which was being signed by them at that point of time, it was trying to suggest that Maharaja would not have any kind of rights, and over a period of time we find that Maharaja was even sent to Britain, that he is not in any way a threat to the East India Company. So, in that sense we find that Punjab was in a way reduced in size militarily, it was made weak, and it was financially crippled as well. So, that was the intention of the East India Company, that how Punjab, which was a major state, and the bravery of the Sikhs was very well known, and so they wanted to in a way weaken this particular state in such a manner that it is never a threat to the East India Company. And when you tend to see the various kinds of correspondences between the colonial officials at that point of time, then it becomes evident through one of the letters from Lord Hardinge, which was sent in October 1847 to Henry Lawrence, in which he writes, as you can see on the screen as well: in all our measures taken during minority, we must bear in mind that by Treaty of Lahore, March 1846, Punjab never was intended to be an independent state. In fact, native princes is in fetters and under our protection and must do our bidding. So, we find that this kind of a correspondence also suggests that how officials they were very well aware about the situation, and their intentions, they were also very clear as well, and they realized that with this kind of intentions they will be able to secure such kind of possessions in India. Thereafter, we also see that this was a time when the first Anglo-Sikh war was fought. They did not in a way secure Punjab for themselves in the first Anglo-Sikh war, but in the second Anglo-Sikh war we find that they were able to secure Punjab for themselves. And we see during this particular period, when from 1845-46, when the first war ended till the second war began, how Treaty of Lahore in a way greatly disillusioned Rani Jindan and Lal Singh, and it revealed to them the true intentions of the English as well. And when we find that how the British resident was interfering too much in the affairs in the Lahore Darbar, then they were trying to in a way see this kind of a situation which was detrimental to the interests of Punjab. And so the control of the resident, the British resident, was in a way resented by Rani Jindan and Lal Singh both. And when resident asked the Lahore Darbar to surrender Kashmir to Raja Gulab Singh, Lal Singh indirectly encouraged Imaduddin, Darbar's Muslim governor there, to resist as well. So, we find that how British, they in a way saw this situation was not to their liking, and an English force was sent to Kashmir and captured it. Lal Singh was found guilty of complicity in the affair and was tried by a court of inquiry presided over by the British resident, who found him guilty, and he was being exiled. So, we find that the administration of Lahore Darbars was entrusted to a council of regency consisting of Fakir Nuruddin, Teja Singh, Sher Singh and Dinanath. And we find that when year 1846 was in a way fast approaching, or it was coming to an end, and we find that it was stipulated in the treaty of 11th March 1846 for the withdrawal of the British troops from Lahore, and we find that Lord Hardinge planned to control Lahore administration for some years more in the name of minor Maharaja, and the resident urged some influential Sardars to petition East India Company for the retention of her troops at Lahore during the minority of Maharaja. So, we find that earlier, when you tend to see the situation from 1845-46 till 1849, when the war was being fought, the second Anglo-Sikh war. So, during between this period, we find that when British, they had to leave those territories, they had to come out of those territories, but the British, they were not ready to come out of those territories, and how they in a way forced the Sikh Sardars in a manner, or gave them some kinds of remuneration or bribes, etc., so that they make some kind of a plea, and how British, they had to remain in Lahore. And we find that when these Sardars made these kinds of plea, then a new treaty was signed at Bhairawal on 26 December 1846, and which provided for the stationing of the British troops at Lahore for the protection of Maharaja and preservation of the peace of the country. And the Lahore Darbar agreed to pay rupees 25 lakhs per annum for meeting the expenses of the British force as well. So, we find that the period from the first Anglo-Sikh war to the second Anglo-Sikh war, British, they were trying to in a way consolidate their position in Lahore, and at the same time they were taking all sorts of steps so that they are able to consolidate their position. And we see that when you talk about the minority of Dilip Singh, which was to last till 1854, actual administration was vested in the British resident, who was assisted by a council of 8 chiefs. So, we find that how British during this time, they wanted to control Punjab for their own benefit, and how British resident, he was the virtual ruler of this place, and he had a lot of civil and military power, and how Sardars, they were reduced to the position of the executive officers, and such kind of a situation was rented by Rani Jindan. And we see that how Governor General, he issued a proclamation where we see that the Governor General of India, who feels that the interest of a father in education and guardianship of young prince, thought it absolutely necessary to separate Maharaja from Maharani, his mother. So, decisions, they were being taken to separate the prince from Maharani, and he being sent to Britain. And we find that the allowances of Maharani, they were also being reduced to 48,000 per annum, and she was being removed to Shekhupura. And we find that this kind of a situation of the second Anglo-Sikh war also emerged when we find that there was some kind of a revolt, and it was being suggested that the Mool Raj, who was the governor of Multan, had revolted. And this situation came because the British resident in a way was asking Mool Raj to pay 26 lakh rupees as Nazrana and surrender all land north of Ravi to Lahore Darbar. And we find that in addition, it was decided to raise the revenue of Multan by about 1/3 for 3 years, and unable to continue under the new harsh conditions imposed on him, Mool Raj, he resigned in 1847. and we find that another governor was being sent, but the rude and the overbearing behavior of the British who were sent along with the new governor, it irritated the people of Multan, that they in a way compelled Mul Raj to assume the leadership of the revolt. And when you talk about the British Governor Generals who came later, Lord Dalhousie, and he said that he also had these kinds of imperialist designs, and he also wanted to secure in a way Punjab for the colonial government. And we find that when Lord Dalhousie became the Governor General, the second Anglo-Sikh war was being fought, and how six they suffered their defeat at Chilianwala, and but the final or the decisive battle was won by the British at Gujarat, and the whole of Punjab was lying at the feet of the British. And we find that when the Governor General assumed the kind of authority over this region, we find that how Maharaja Dalip Singh, he in a way had to leave India, and he was given a pension of £50,000, and he was sent to Britain, and how administration of Punjab was entrusted to a board of commissioner. So this kind of an annexation which was being done, it was also being criticized by some of the colonial officials as well, that it was a breach of trust. And Evans Bell, he also argued that it was inexpedient and avoidable, and annexation of Punjab was no annexation, it was a sacred breach of trust. So this was also felt by some of the colonial officials, and that the Sikh army in a way revolted, but it was not up to the Maharaja. Maharaja did not revolt, and the Council of Regency had in a way risen in rebellion in that sense. So the regent for Maharaja, it was the bounden duty of the Frederick Curie, who was the regent for Maharaja, who was a British resident, to suppress the rebellion of Mul Raj or Sikh army, and Maharaja could not be held responsible for this kind of rebellion, and so he should not have been deprived of his kingdom. So British, we find that how this kind of a breach of trust was there, and we find that Dalhousie, when he announced that this kind of a thing, that how Punjab was to be annexed by the colonial rulers, and so this shows the higher game for Dalhousie, that how he was ready to in a way capture Punjab by one or the other means. So we see that the British imperialist attitude was devoid of any ethical behavior, and they engaged in all sorts of hypocrisy and tactics to secure their rule in India, and Punjab was no exception. Thank you very much.